Hey guys, what's up? Unrested back again, and I'm still on the course of answering your personal questions to me as far as either in the last two videos, one was covering how you would deal with confrontation in Japan, and other personal questions about dealing with certain situations. I wanted to kind of switch it up because our last one was a little bit on the heavier side, and I thought I'd cover something a little lighter, as in manga. One of the big questions I always get is, what's your number one favorite manga in Japan? And I will say most people probably think I lean towards horror manga, which I do. But for the most part, horror manga's kind of been played out for me personally in the last, I'd say, 2 to 5 years. Mostly because I guess some of the greats are already read, reread, and gone over, analyzed like a million times. We've got Junji Ito, Kazu Umezu, Ochazuka Nori, and if you don't already know those are the ones I would suggest if you want to dive into your very first taste of horror manga. But for me personally, I haven't found or latched onto a really good horror writer in the past, couple of years that I've been reading. In general, I'm not the go-to guy when it comes to manga or anime. I never came to Japan for that. That's not a massive passion of mine. Do I enjoy it? Do I respect it? Yes, absolutely. I talked about it in my last video a little bit about how much respect I have for those who work in the industry due to the hours that they work. For example, one you probably all know, and that's why I'm referencing him, is Miyazaki, who's done the Ghibli films. If you don't already know, that guy only sleeps 2 hours a night when he is making a new movie. So put that into perspective of how hard he must work to get these done and how he hand paints every background of those movies. But when I dive into what I personally feel is my favorite manga, I actually usually delve more into the surreal. For example, Paprika is one of the very surreal, I guess, Keiji manga slash anime. Perfect Blue, where it deals with the psychological aspects of the stress of a girl band member. And another one that is my all-time favorite, which kind of deals with the surreal. And I will say not just surreal, but sort of the darker side of life. Not necessarily horror, but more of the psychological aspect of how life can damage you. And that is Goodnight Poompoon, also known as Oyasumi Poompoon. And if you are an avid manga reader, you probably already know about this, but this is more of a video launched towards those not as in-depth when it comes to manga. And for me, the reason I feel like this manga, Goodnight Poompoon, really is something I connect to is because of how realistic it gets with life. And in a short synopsis, hopefully without spoiling too much for you, I'd really suggest you read it if you haven't already. Goodnight Poompoon deals with a small Japanese elementary school student, starting with the first chapter of his life and moving through chapter by chapter as his character grows. And no, he's not a hero. He doesn't have superpowers. They don't live in a fantasy world. They literally live in everyday Japan. And it deals with how he views his family life, his interactions with his fellow students, and how his views of the world and his dreams for the future are molded and changed by that. And I feel like the writer of this manga really takes an in-depth look at how psychological drama, family problems, the chemistry between relationships, both friend and, on an intimate and passionate level, how they mold us too, and also sometimes how our dreams can even be extinguished due to the fact of how harsh life really is. Everybody grows up having plans, but what Goodnight Poompoon shows is that life is what actually happens while we have plans for what we want to do. Starting with his early life in elementary school, he talks about, first of all, wanting to become an astronaut or a space scientist, as he says it, and that's mostly because it's using elementary kids speak for understanding what astronomy is. I can definitely see a little kid saying, I want to be a space scientist instead of an astronomist. And he does this because of a girl he falls in love with in elementary school, who's very big upon looking and, I guess in some ways metaphorically, wishing upon the stars. And because of this, he wants to celebrate not just her dreams, but the dreams of wanting to impress her and follow something that he says is a cool career. Does he ever amount to becoming an astronomer? No, sadly not. In fact, not only does he not become an astronomer, but as we watch his life develop, we slowly see it degrade into kind of the dregs of society. It's brutal. Where to even begin? First of all, you deal with his parents fighting, and at first what you consider a complete insane act by his father, you think the father gets into a fight with the wife and is almost about to kill her. But later you find out he attacked his own wife because she was threatening to kill their child, Poompoon. And he's been in jail all this time because not only did he attack her and go to jail for that, but he also wouldn't admit what exactly happened to the police so that Poompoon would forever have his mom at home to take care of him, because he felt like the mother was a better caretaker than him, and that all kids need their mother first before their father. And so he kind of sacrifices himself in that sense to first save his life and then take care of the rest of his life, while at the same time being considered sort of this DV individual who's a deviant within what society considers a regular marriage. And that's just the first sad aspect of Poompoon's life. It gets into darker aspects too, where his uncle moves in to help take care of Poompoon, and you start to see this very nihilistic view on life from the perspective of his uncle, who not only cheats on his own wife, but then in fact asks all the girls that he cheats on her with to destroy his own life. Like, he can't be happy. He doesn't understand how to be happy in a relationship, so he tries to not only destroy his own marriage, but every relationship he tries to start outside of his marriage, which it gets pretty dark pretty fast, and you can imagine how. On top of that, as you watch Poompoon grow up and you see him go through the different stages of life that we all go through, his dreams are eventually shattered. He eventually wants to run away with the girl he falls in love with in elementary school, so much so that he helps her murder her own mother due to the fact that her mother is part of a extreme religious cult. Kind of, I guess if you were to compare it to something in America or the Western side of the world, it would be like a super fundamental religious person who doesn't let their child step outside of the bounds of that fundamental belief that they have, which can sometimes be very cruel and very harsh. I'm not saying all religion is bad or that having a strong belief in religion is bad, as I do think there's many people who do need a religion and God in their life. There is certain aspects that, when pushed too harshly, can almost seem cultist and enforced to almost a policing level of someone's series of boundaries and morality and ethics that they feel need to be contained within this cult-like status of the fundamental religion. And this mother is very abusive in the sense that she uses her devotion to her cult as a reason to attack her own daughter and abuse her own daughter, which definitely I feel is wrong for any religion. I don't think any religion should be used as a basis to abuse your children. So because of this, Poompoon feels justified in helping his girlfriend at the time murder her mother, I should say. And it's because of this that then almost the entire future of his life is shattered. He is constantly on the run from the police. He is constantly, I guess, in a state of PTSD from experiencing the act of killing someone. And he's constantly worried about the body that they then buried. And because of this, they try to move away to a smaller town that his girlfriend and I suppose now fiance is always dreamed about living in, because she said that was the best part of her childhood. But really, instead of it getting to be used as their dream location to live in, they're now using it as a place to hide away from the horrible crime that they committed. And then it gets even darker from there, to the point that you see the relationship become an abusive one. She is constantly worried that Poompoon is going to turn both of them in for murdering her mother. She's constantly worried that he will not be faithful to her. And at the same time, Poompoon is having to work these really horrible night shift jobs that are like the worst of the worst jobs. Not saying night shift is a bad thing. I've worked it before in my past. But for him, he's working like just the most brutal, dregs of society jobs that you would never want, for very low pay, at very bad hours, very bad locations, in the worst part of town, with the worst kind of bosses that yell at him all the time. So really it's a matter of multiple facets making his life horrible, not just his home life because of his now very abusive relationship with his girlfriend, but also what he's dealing with at his job. And his only thing that he can grasp onto is staying devoted to this girl that he's always had a crush on, to the point that when she says she's worried about him looking at other women, or worried about telling on her for the crime that they committed, she asks that his sacrifice to prove that he will never betray her should be to cut out one of his eyes, so she knows that the only one eye he has left is always staring at her. Which, I mean, metaphorically and realistically is possibly the darkest realm you could go into, as far as mutilating your own body to prove your sincerity to someone who supposedly says they love you. From there, it just gets darker and darker, where their life falls more and more into disrepair, their relationship as well. Their living situation is falling apart as the police pursue them further. Their domestic violence is making the relationship worse and worse, to the point that finally his girlfriend in turn leaves one night saying that she's hurt him too much for the relationship to continue, and hangs herself. He goes on a look for her, trying to search for her and find her, and eventually finds her on the mountain where they buried her mother, and she's hung herself. And feeling at this point that he has no more room in his heart, in his being, for any more damage, he in turn tears out his other eye to allow himself to bleed to death on the hilltop where his fiancée/girlfriend hung herself, because how can he see any kind of future or dreams anymore when the one thing he wanted the most is destroyed herself? It continues on a little bit from there, and from what I've heard, there's actually 2 endings. I guess that's what I'm not going to try and spoil, so that you yourself might want to look into the full breadth of this entire story. Mind you, I've only briefly given you a synopsis. There's so much more and so much deeper and darker aspects that really get into life, as far as like people asking God for help, who's represented by God, which is, I think you actually find it to be a very dark comedy who they have represent God in this manga series. But for me, the reason it's one of my all-time favorite is because, yes, number one, horror is my all-time favorite genre, but I feel like the scariest, darkest horror is the real ones we create with real life. When I want to find something that I find particularly disturbing or creepy or scary, I don't go reading creepypasta. I don't go reading, fantasy horror stories. Not that there's anything wrong with those. I enjoy one now and again. I don't really find anything that's fantasy creepy that scary though, because we can always just be like, well, that's not real. We don't actually get attacked by ghosts and demons in real life. We don't actually get attacked by mutated monsters and zombies like you would see in a Resident Evil game. The real scary aspects of our life are the ones that humans can create. And for me, that's the most horrific thing. And when I want to find something very scary, I might go onto Reddit and read like Morbid Reality, the Darwin Awards, Crazy People, win stupid prizes. And I feel like these kind of stories are kind of the scariest and darkest things that can happen within humanity. And that's what Goodnight Poompoon has really captured. Not just a very realistic slice of life for someone going through a very hard episode, but just how scary and psychologically damaging that part of our life can be sometimes, especially when our dreams fail, when our relationships don't work, when we're discarded by our own family members. And I think it takes a very realistic approach and look at those, and that's some of the scariest things that exist in real life. If you yourself want to look into it, I would highly recommend it. The only people I would say maybe don't take a look for this graphic novel is if you yourself right now are going through a very traumatic period of your life, if you're dealing with a lot of existential dread or family problems or relationship problems, maybe hold off until you're in a better place. I feel like if I would have read this while I was in a very dark place, this might have made that even darker. So maybe hold off until then. It deals with some pretty extreme subjects like suicide, self-mutilation, body dysphoria, all kinds of really dark aspects of the human psyche. But that being said, that is what my all-time favorite manga series is Goodnight Poompoon or Oyasumi Poompoon. And I would highly recommend it to anyone looking for a great read. Until next time, I hope I have summed that answer up pretty well for you. I will continue down the line of answering these. I'm actually going to be checking back to make a big list of things that are still left to be answered, and I thank you for all your comments, all your suggestions, and all the questions you've asked. They are great. You guys are extremely intelligent with the things you've asked, and I just feel lucky to have an audience like you guys. Until next time, I'm Unrested. I'll talk to you again real soon.